but I'm such a failure as a father. I thought I was better off just leaving you alone.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, as the viewer, you're like, wow, that actually makes so much sense now when you think about his interactions with her from the very beginning.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of A Lost Plot, the podcast by storytellers for storytellers so that we can tell better stories ourselves. As always, I'm your host, Maverick, and today we have back with us one of our favorite guests and co-host, Andrew, to review the latest Marvel Cinematic Universe release. That's what we're talking about, The Thunderbolts, a 2025 American superhero film with the story and screenplay by Eric Pearson, with the screenplay assisted by Joanna Call and directed by Jake Schreier. So, getting right into the details, Andrew, what was your initial impressions and your rating of Thunderbolts?
I feel like it's time for you to give your rating first, but
You always say that, which is why it's just not true.
No, the last few times I've definitely given it first, but I can give my impressions. I thoroughly enjoyed watching this movie. Now, whether this movie is actually successful at conveying the themes and messages within it is another question. I think this movie is an attempt at mental health awareness, I think, is kind of what they're going for. But I think it's an enjoyable watch. It's much more grounded than their previous films that they've come out with that are supposed to be like massive world-ending events. Granted, this one does turn into something of that sort, but it's not as grandiose, if that's a word, as the others.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's totally fair. I would say that I come along similar lines. I really enjoyed watching this in the movie theater, which I was very surprised about. I thought I totally thought this was going to be an absolute flop. This was a bomb of a movie. I was going to hate the 2 hours I wasted watching this solely for your guys' entertainment in the podcast. But it turns out that I actually enjoyed myself and thought, wow, this was a fun movie to watch. Super funny. Had, a half decent storyline, right? I felt like they actually attempted to do a solid work on this one compared to their previous ones. Not anything to write home about and say, dude, watch this 100%, but definitely something that took me and said, wow, I enjoyed that. I think they tried to tell a decent story, and I could see myself watching this movie if someone else had it on, maybe even particularly watching certain scenes, there are some phenomenal scenes in this, I will say. Does not make the movie amazing. But my total rating for this film was a 5.6. So I enjoyed it. I could have seen it being as much as a 6, but I'm not committed to that. I think there are some serious flaws with this, and we will get into that today. But before we get further, Andrew, what was your rating for this film? And then, of course, if you want to give the summary, go ahead and do so.
9.0. No, I'm just kidding.
You're an idiot if you gave this a 9.0. You're
I feel like my feedback would have implied that it was not a 9.0. I ended up with a 6.7. I would probably have just given it like a 6.5 right out the gate. So it's right around where I thought it was. For me, a 7 is like I would 100% rewatch this.
Right.
7 is starting to get to the point where I'm recommending this to people. 6.7, 6.5. It's a movie I'd enjoy rewatching. Probably not going to go around telling everyone you need to watch this movie. I think it appeals to certain audiences. And those people, I would definitely recommend it to. So,
yeah. And that's
I think
totally
it's also definitely a breath of fresh air, or at least a reprieve from what we've been getting from Marvel.
There was this idea, I think when I stepped out of this theater, this is one of the few films where I could see myself looking at another Marvel fan who's really disappointed with recent Marvel stuff and saying, if you like Marvel, you should watch this film. you will get something out of it that you would not have gotten out of other previous Marvel films. I would not say that about, say, the latest Doctor Strange film or a lot of the TV shows that have come out recently, right? I would
Or
not say that
Captain
I would
America: Brave
recommend
New
those.
World.
Exactly. But I would say so about this one. This one actually has some decent things going for it. So at the very
Um,
least, you'll have a fun time.
Yeah, I think it does two things, right? The biggest thing I think is this is a Marvel film that most people could actually probably just walk into without having seen other movies as much, especially this late into the franchise, and still get quite a bit out of it. Like, save for the
Hmm.
Winter Soldier, most of the characters in there haven't really been developed all that much, and so they're starting kind of with a fresh roster, if you will. They're taking characters that have kind of been around on the sidelines and making them more prominent. And then the second thing I think it does well is it takes an Avengers style movie and just picks one character to focus on rather than the entire roster
Yep.
and develops that character. So
Yep.
you end up without having like an Avengers movie where there's like a dozen people and trying to develop all of them at once and not doing it at all. And you just develop one and you kind of have the rest as side characters, even though they are a team, so to speak.
Right. And
So
it's not that they don't develop the other characters at all, but the key focus is on that one character. And that means that you have a locus of control, if you will, right? That everything else centers around. And that's I think that's key to having a compelling story is you need to have some level of focus. And I think a lot of these recent Marvel films have lacked that. They didn't have any focus. They just went on to see these massive wars with big characters and big villains and big stories, and they got too big for their own britches, and everything falls apart. So
yeah,
this was
I,
not that, which I appreciated, even though it was a team up film.
I do want to clarify too, by the way. A lot of people that I've been seeing have been praising this movie, saying it's amazing, we're so back. And it's like, there are definitely some things going for this movie. I definitely enjoyed the watch through. I think the reason it's getting so much praise is because everything else is so trash that people are like,
Yep.
wow, this is a semi quality movie. I love it. Um, I think that this shows that Marvel's at least capable of trying to tell a story and giving us a good time. Um, but it's definitely not like Captain America Winter Soldier levels of good storytelling. So just want to clarify that. Even if we're like throughout this podcast saying, yeah, this is so much better than everything we've been getting, doesn't mean it's an amazing film that we're like, oh, this is Inception worthy.
No, no, not at all. With that in mind, you want to give the audiences a summary of what this film is about. And if you will, like, with all of that being said, if you have any strong interest in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, I would recommend watching it, right? It's
Yeah.
probably worth your time. If you're not a huge Marvel fan, maybe listen to the review and then make the decision for yourself. That's also fine. Andrew might have a different opinion. He's free to speak that. But generally, if you don't want spoilers, this podcast always has spoilers. So don't
Yeah.
expect to come into the film surprised if you listen to this. Anyways,
Yeah.
carrying forward, Andrew, go ahead.
This movie primarily focuses on Black Widow's estranged sister, Yelena Bolova, and her struggles in life following the death of her sister. Now, quick background before the movie actually gets here. Yelena's character shows up in the Hawkeye show. She shows up in Black Widow. The implication we get from the Hawkeye show is she knows her sister's dead and is trying to come to terms with that, and she blames Hawkeye for it in the show. And there's some resolution there. That's all we really know about Yelena going into this, and the fact that she was kind of estranged from her sister since they were children. So that said, you don't really need that going into the movie because the movie gives you the information that like she's dealing with her sister's death. Moving on though, movie starts us off with Yelena on a mission. It's not the like standard massive superhero fight, but it is still a hero fighting somebody or
Mm-hmm.
character, if you will, going on a mission. It's revealed she's been working for Valentina on kind of these Black Ops missions. She is dealing with her sister's death and this depression she has, this sort of senselessness, loss of drive, if you will. She goes to her father, who was the Red Guardian, Alexei Shostakov, probably the funniest person in this movie. She then proceeds to go on a second mission in which it is revealed that Valentina has sent other characters that we have interacted with in past Marvel projects to go and trap them and then destroy them as evidence for this project she's been working on. Those characters include U.S. Agent, Ghost, Taskmaster, and Yelena.
U.S. Agent? Don't you mean Captain America?
Yeah. We'll get to that later.
But for anyone who's watched other content, it's John Walker who shows up in the what's Sam Wilson's show?
Falcon Winter Soldier.
Yeah, Falcon Winter Soldier. So he's the guy who shows up as the quote-unquote new Captain America at the beginning of that and gets disgraced in the middle of that. Once again, not something that I feel like is necessary for you to watch this film, because they also explain that at the beginning of this film. But go ahead, keep explaining.
And I do want to talk a little bit about this thing we go back to a lot,
sure,
but
we'll
get to that later. They end up teaming up. They find someone named Bob and continue on their journey out of this vault. They get confronted by Valentina upon exiting. Bob kind of gives himself up in an attempt to let them escape and gets captured by Valentina. And we discover that he is a project she's been working on, the only success of that project, and he has become the Sentry. Valentina, the group, currently consisting of Ghost, U.S. Agent, and Yelena, are found by her father, Alexei, and then they are captured by the Winter Soldier. Winter Soldier is contacted by someone. They go on a mission. They try to stop Sentry. Sentry at this point has been kind of convinced by Yelena that he's going to be the new superhero, the Earth's mightiest hero. Then Sentry has a god complex and says, "Why would I listen to you, you insect?" Gets some sort of like kill switch, turns into the void, begins deleting people off the face of the earth. And then the Thunderbolts go and confront him in his psyche and save him through the power of friendship.
Nice.
Oh, and then the movie ends with them becoming the New Avengers, sponsored by your friendly neighborhood Uncle Sam.
Yes, which was kind of well. We can talk about that when we get talking about that. Anyways, We are going to start this off as we always do with that opening scene. What were your thoughts, Andrew, about how they open it with Yelena? What is her last name? Bolova.
Mr. Lava.
I was thinking that. Dang it. Okay.
You can tell we hang out a lot because we're like our frequencies are tuned in.
It's a little bit like, yeah. So you have this primary character, Yelena Bolova, and she is killing people while monologuing about how her life seems pointless. And then she proceeds to go to her dad's house and is like, my life is pointless. And they have this discussion about the meaning of life and how you find purpose in life and all of that stuff before she is sent on this significant mission by Valentina. What was your thoughts on this opening scene, introducing us back to this character of Yelena, and how well they compellingly drew us into the film?
I think the opener is interesting, right? I mentioned it's a little bit different than other Marvel films, but it still starts off with an action sequence.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been thinking about these openers, right? Because we talk a lot about how, it's the standard opener. I don't know that it's necessarily bad. I just want to clarify that.
Sure.
Like, it's a standard thing, like just how Star Wars has their standard title crawl, right? And then you end up somewhere in space. It can be done poorly, right? I don't know that the fact that it's standard means that it is. Just to clarify that.
I think...
go ahead.
I mean, the Star Wars example is interesting, just as a side note, because one, it almost only exists as Star Wars. You might have the storybook opener for other things, like Shrek, I guess, but like for the most part, the similar technique is not generally used, so it is novel in that regard for catching your attention. Second off, Star Wars almost always, for the opening scene, starts off with an action sequence in space, or at least with some relevance to space, with the exception of, I think, Rogue One, I think, pans to a different onto planet instead of being in space. But anyways,
Rogue One also doesn't have the title crawl, though.
True. Anyways, we're getting way too in the weeds, I
Yeah,
guess,
yeah.
on that point. My point was that that's a unique situation. I wouldn't use that as a broad application.
Sure. Um,
But you
for
are right
this,
that the idea that they just start off with a fighting scene that reestablishes characters' powers is not wrong. They
yeah,
just need to be careful with how they do it to make sure it is
yeah,
actually effective at establishing those characters and still engaging the audience.
yeah. I think the opener does a good job establishing who Yelena is. Right there is one thing I want to make note of also about this movie. It does a good job of catching the audience up to speed in the event that they haven't seen anything. Right, with Yelena, you get very quickly where she is. Right, she's the sister of Black Widow. Her sister is dead. She's dealing with this trauma. Even though she's monologuing about it, she's meant to be this person who's kind of losing it. Um,
Right.
and at that point, like, it makes sense for her to be just talking to this random guy she's holding hostage. Like, she's very nonchalant about her job too. She's pretty confident in her ability to accomplish it, not worried about whether or not it's going to get finished. And
Mm-hmm.
so she's just like, I don't really have a purpose in life other than this job, and I don't have friends, so you're the guy I'm stuck talking to right now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I don't know that the opener was like groundbreaking or like, wow, that was so good. Um, but I don't know that it was necessarily detrimental. I mean, it did play into the larger plot of the movie.
Right.
But yeah, those are my thoughts on the intro.
Yeah, no, and I think that last point is exactly what I was thinking, is that what was unique about this is it specifically ties into the future plot of the film, which is what I like to see, right? It's engaging, fight action sequences, all that kind of stuff is all a great way to start a film, right? Really catch the audience and engage them. Um, but the way they did it this time was that they actually tied it into something that was relevant to the plot at large. And in this case, it was tied to the main character's individual struggle of finding purpose and meaning in a terrible occupation that has become mundane and has continued to scar her till she's numb. Right. And that's what we get going forward. We're introduced to Yelena. Do you think that she's compelling? Does she have a good reason for being there? Is she flawed? Does she have a lot of good motives around her? Like, what kind of character are we dealing with here?
I personally think Yelena's character is good. I mean, she has this struggle. She's depressed. She's at her wit's end. She expresses this to her dad. I think the movie does a good job of drawing it out too, kind of increasing the tensions for her own development to the point where she breaks in front of her dad and is just like, "You weren't there for me. You
Mm-hmm.
left." And you have this emotional scene between the two of them.
Yeah.
Um, I think something else I want to note about this movie, because we're comparing it to other Marvel movies, I kept thinking back in the theater to Thor Love and Thunder, because Thor Love and Thunder has a very serious tone to it. Jane Foster is dying of cancer, and yet they make so much stupid jokes throughout the movie. And it's like, this
Mm-hmm.
movie makes jokes too, but it handles those jokes in such a way that it flows better. Whereas Thor Love and Thunder felt you were like swinging a yo-yo and then flipping the opposite direction. It just felt so out of place. Like they were
Mm-hmm.
trying to do two different things. Whereas
Right.
this movie takes this very serious topic, but the nature of the characters, the nature of the events going on, the jokes that were made sense.
Right. And I think that that's key, right? Because you're looking at, for example, why is this film funny and quote unquote acceptable in Andrew's eyes compared to Thor Love and Thunder? Now, to play the devil's advocate, I haven't watched Thor Love and Thunder in a couple years, and I frankly don't plan to because we reviewed that and we did not think, as a general consensus, it's worth rewatching. So I would just say listen to that review. But in regards to this film specifically, you know why you can both have emotional scenes and also have humor at the same time with some of these same characters. And that's because it flows naturally from the characters themselves, right? And you see the Red Guardian, who's also Yelena's father, and you see that he's this guy who's super excited about his daughter's life and super excited about the idea of superheroes and what he once was and reclaiming that glory. And so every opportunity he sees to get that, he's just so excited. And the humor comes from that, right? That it naturally flows from this excessive exuberance that the Red Guardian displays, right? And then you have the other character who's also fairly funny in this is John Walker, and the humor is more of in spite of him, right? He's a character who says things and does things that are funny because it's kind of dumb or it doesn't really make sense in the way he thinks it makes sense, or he's just too egotistical, right? And so you see two aspects of humor being used here that flow naturally from the characters themselves rather than being shoved into it to make it funny because we want to make this super funny. I just, yeah. Anyways, that's a side tangent because this is not a podcast about humor. This is a podcast about telling good stories, and as much as a movie can be funny, it doesn't make it a good story or a bad story. It just
it's also like we review a lot of Marvel movies on this podcast, and we're gonna probably do the rest of them at a certain point here in the future. And so it's like we're giving this one praise. So to you guys as the viewers or listeners, I want to be able to provide a contrast to give you a better idea of like what do we think looks like a better example of how certain things play out. Even though this isn't the perfect example, this is within that same universe, and this is a very recent movie that came out that does some of those things. In some instances, much better.
Right. And I will say, if you just wanted to watch this film for the pure comedy / entertainment factor, you probably could. Like, it's that funny. It's funny enough that I would watch it just for the jokes.
Yeah, I will say I don't think I've actually watched a movie in the theater with Maverick and heard him laugh audibly, but there was like I counted like at least a dozen times where this man was just like chuckling at stuff like the Red Guardian said, or John Walker, or even Bucky at one point said something and you chuckled at it. So I was like, okay, we're getting somewhere here.
That's crazy. Okay. I didn't even think about that. Yeah, the Red Guardian did get me a couple times, and John Walker did as well.
I think also his accent's just so good.
Oh, yeah. All of the actors' accents in this were amazing. Florence Pugh is amazing. I never remember the guy who's from Stranger Things, but, you know, he's a good actor.
I think it's David Harbour.
Yeah. Anyways, love the Red Guardian. Good job. Good job saving that little girl, dude. Anyways, we're going to move on. I think that Yelena is an engaging character. She has a lot of flaws, and that's primarily driving her. We've seen a lot of super mildly flawed or mildly compelling heroes. If you look at the Captain Marvel series, or you look at other characters that have come out recently, I don't think they've been super compelling. Either that, or they lean far into the darker aspect where you have Scarlet Witch, right, and how they went with her. So, either way, I think this one did very well at doing a deep dive on a single character and her flaws, and Yelena was that character. I'm trying to figure out how I want to do this. We could do the side characters later. I think I really want to focus on getting through the primary plot, right? And the primary plot, at this point, you can't have a discussion around Yelena and the conclusion to her arc without both talking about the two villains in this film.
So Sentry and Valentina.
Yeah. I would suggest, but I'll leave it up to you, talking about Valentina first, just because I think she's a lot easier to deal with, and then talking about the Sentry / Bob.
Valentina's character, right? I want to take this movie on its surface. I think this is going to become more difficult with other movies in Phase 5. I think we were in Phase 5 or 6 at this point. I don't even know. But post Endgame, I think it's going to become incredibly difficult for us to judge movies purely on the content within them, and this movie is an exception to that. And I'm going to try my best to keep most of this feedback to the movie itself. That said, Valentina's character, in my mind, is meant to represent those who are attempting to fill this vacuum that has been created post the Avengers.
Mm-hmm.
These characters, everything going on in the world that is the Thunderbolts, if you will, a lot of the references they make are to the events of Endgame. Right, we've had Strange Multiverse of Madness, which doesn't even take place in our universe. WandaVision, which happened in a small town that nobody really knew about. Loki, which happened outside of the dimension of time. You have Falcon and the Winter Soldier, which was it was semi big, but at the same time, it's still pretty recent. And of all the things that have happened, like Falcon and the Winter Soldier and then Captain America Brave New World are the two events that really get referenced in this movie.
Right.
Other than Endgame. So to these characters, this vacuum that's been created, we're given the impression that this is still something that is very prominent in the world of the MCU. The reason this is important is because when you have a vacuum, that vacuum will get filled. And
Right.
prior to this, you have the Avengers, you have Nick Fury, you have what was S.H.I.E.L.D., but is now kind of the Avengers have filled that void. Them gone, everyone's asking the question, who's going to be Earth's mightiest heroes, right? Hulk's retired, Hawkeye is retired, Black Widow's dead, Captain America's dead, Iron Man's dead. No one even knows Spider-Man exists at this point because of No Way Home. Is it No Way Home or Far From Home? I don't even remember. One of the two. The one with the other Spider-Man. I think it's No Way Home. Far From Home was the second one. That's right. The names are just so similar. Anyways, that said, with this power vacuum being created, the Avengers Tower stands dormant. Valentina is, in my mind, meant to represent one of the people who's attempting to fill that vacuum, and not for the morally upright reasons that, say, Captain America and the other Avengers would have been trying to do for. She wants power, influence, prestige. And she's willing to do inhumane things to get that. Hence, I forget what the project was called. It was like Ox or something. The corporation she built.
Yeah, the corporation, yeah.
To experiment on human beings in order to create the Sentry. And she is, I don't want to say completely incompetent, but she is semi-incompetent in the sense that she didn't even know that Sentry existed and was locked in her vault unconscious. I think it's meant to be that way. She's not meant to be this super genius. She's meant to be someone who's vying for power and doesn't really have what it takes to hold that power. She's very ambitious, and it's like the idea of pride going before a fall. She wants something so badly, she's not taking all of the proper steps to get there. She's also kind of, I think of her almost as, now I don't want to quite compare her to Frankenstein, but it's kind of a version of that, if you will. She creates this monster that is Sentry without thinking about the consequences, and it gets the best of her by the end of this movie. So I don't know that Valentina is the most compelling villain. I think she serves her purpose. I think she's more of a setup for Sentry and kind of this discussion of like mental health that the movie's going for.
Yeah, I mean, of the two, she's definitely the easier to deal with because she's so straightforward, right? And I think that's part of the problem with her as a villain is that if you look at her dialogue, and I know I try not to harp too much on the dialogue, but sometimes I can't help myself. In this case, the dialogue is atrocious, and it is simply because her dialogue is her mansplaining what's going on with herself and what should go on in the film and what she cares about. And you just stop for 1 second and think, would anyone talk like this? And the answer is no. No one would. And that's just how they have now forced her dialogue to move the plot along rather than having her move the plot along organically based off of what she would say naturally. She just felt very fake and propped up for the sake of the film. Now, she did achieve a purpose, so it's not like she wasn't important for the sake of the film, but I felt like it was very much manufactured for her purposes. Contrast that to Bob, who is very much not that case, in my opinion. I don't know if you want to go into... Actually, I'll go into Bob because I'm sure you have more lore content around the Sentry and the Void than I do. And so...
I do want to say before you get into Bob, while I think what they did was intentional, it doesn't necessarily mean that I like where they went with Valentina. I think Valentina
No.
has the potential to be a much more compelling villain than just an egotistical person on a power trip. She could have been this very much maniacal, kind of almost think like deep state running things. Like think of her like a foil to Nick Fury's character, right? The evil version of him, where
Right.
she's assembling, and that's how she's portrayed in the Falcon Winter Soldier show, which is where I thought they were going with it, because she shows up at the end when John Walker's been convicted, he's disgraced, no one wants to talk to him, he's having problems at home with his family life. He was this amazing U.S. soldier, 3 medals of honor, basically the peak human condition before taking the serum. He's at his wit's end, and she comes to him and says, "Hey, I have a mission for you. Would you like your shield back?" Basically, I'm going to give you purpose. And it's like this idea that she's taking these heroes that have been disgraced and creating her own secret Avengers, if you will. So I think this is a missed opportunity the movie had.
No, just we could see that going forward. I think that the spoiler alert for you who have not watched the film, you do see her at the end simply manufacturing a lie in the moment that she had planned all of the destruction that goes on to be stopped by the superheroes that showed up at the scene of the crime. And rather than confronting her about it, you see that they instead embrace the fact that they are now the new Avengers, and they basically say, "We own your soul. Don't do a single thing we don't want. Otherwise, we are revealing the truth," is kind of the inference that you get from the end of the film. So, as I have conflicting thoughts about that, but we can get to that. But that does leave the door open to what you're saying, is that they could reuse her as a more compelling villain that's learned from her mistakes in this film and actually does something with that to create a danger for someone, for a protagonist going forward.
I kind of did want to see her die, to be honest.
Well, I mean, you wanted to see everyone die in this film, and that didn't happen. So
okay, that's not true. But I think the reason
you
I said
didn't want
to
see Red Guardian die. Okay,
true. The reason I didn't want that, the reason I think her death would have been more fitting is kind of fulfilling this Frankenstein trope where she creates this monster that is the Sentry, and she ends up falling victim to this and dies. It's not something that went against the movie, though. I want to make that clear. There are other things that are much more problematic.
Yeah. And we're getting a little bit into the weeds of what could be, but I do think that it's an important point to at least demonstrate what that could have been for the sake of the audience understanding that there was potential here that was wasted with Valentina. But she wasn't really the main villain anyways. The main villain was always meant to be Bob, and he's kind of uniquely brought up compared to recent Marvel villains, in that a lot of these recent Marvel villains are very much the stock, "I have come here to take over the universe, and here I am, and why don't you just hand it over to me?" No? Okay, I am here to kill you all. And you've pretty much got that to some road degree or another. Cue the Marvels film, cue the God Butcher, what's his name, from Thor Love and Thunder, etc. In this film specifically, right, you have this character of Bob, who is this experimented upon guy who is super into drugs to the degree that his mind doesn't even work super well. And he has these lapses in memory and will completely forget what just happened as his mind recollects things. And in this moment of weakness, he is given this opportunity to join this experiment to make himself a better person and contribute to society, and he gains the power of the Sentry, right? With the power of the Sentry, he now has godlike abilities, right? He has the power of the suns and the power to stop bullets and not get hurt by anyone. And then what happens is he ends up turning evil and saying, "I am my own master," and proceeds to beat the crap out of people. And in a moment of, and this is a little bit of summary just to catch you up on his full development as a villain, right? As he's deciding to venture out on his own and is threatening to kill Valentina, a kill switch which was built into him is activated by Valentina's assistant, and he falls to the ground supposedly dead. They walk away like idiots. Turns out he's not dead. and his entire form turns black as the void, the darkness inside of him, takes over. And then the void proceeds out into the rest of New York, which is where they're at, and proceeds to just wreak havoc as it sucks other people into the void and supposedly kills them. Now, you do find out later that he's not actually killing people, he's simply sending them into the void, but in the moment when you first see him revealed, it very much looks like he is absolutely demolishing people and killing them in a second, which is pretty terrifying, I will say, for the start of the introduction of this character. He's shown as a very powerful villain. I thought he was interesting. I think that the inward struggle was very much I always love the inward struggle. I think that's really what resonates with people in general. And I think that even as a villain, it was interesting to see a villain who was clearly so powerful, but also someone I thought that the audience could relate to, because you saw that it was a character who they had a struggle inside themselves, and they felt like the darkness inside of themselves was more powerful than them. And this made logical sense to the audience, both because I think it's relatable, but also because this guy was clearly super addicted to drugs. And the actor does a very good job of displaying that, where he's clearly psyched out of his mind. If you've interacted with someone who's been on drugs for a good portion of their life, they act a certain way, and he acted that certain way. So I was very impressed with the acting by the character who plays Robert in this film. Anyways, I thought that his development as a villain was very good. Ending, very predictable, but what do you know? It's Disney. What do you expect from Disney? Go ahead, Andrew. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I think the Sentry was great in this movie. I think, like you mentioned, I have more comic book knowledge. I don't know a ton about the Sentry, like as much as I would know about, say, like Spider-Man or Winter Soldier or something of that nature. What I do know about the Sentry is he, in the comics, is a meth addict, and he does take the serum thinking that it's going to give him the next best high. Little does he know, it unleashes the most terrifying thing the world has ever seen. That is the void. In the comics, he doesn't. This is a movie, right? So it doesn't play out as long of a time frame as, say, the comics would. In the comics, it creates the void, and they're two separate entities, and he doesn't even know that his own worst enemy is himself. And then finding that out is meant to be a big revelation for him.
Okay.
I'm not mad with the way the movie handled the void at all, to be honest. For the like, right, you have a 2-hour movie, and we only find out about the Sentry's powers like halfway through it. So you're given about an hour to get all of this done. So it's
Right.
like, I also understand, right? You're not going to have a complete one-for-one like drawback from the comics, right? If that were true, then we wouldn't really need our own universe at this point. It's also meant to be a different universe, if you will, right? This is the cinematic universe. So they're drawing inspiration. I do appreciate the callbacks. I do like to see things being accurate. I also am not going to judge the movie based off of whether or not it was comically accurate. In some instances, I may personally be a little disappointed, but I don't think it goes against the movie, if that makes sense. I think the Sentry's character is interesting. I do like the meth head Bob. I think he provides some great comedic relief for the movie, while also going and like kind of using his character to tie back to this mental health idea they're trying to go for. It provides good character development for Yelena. There's instances where she's kind of drawing out her own internal pain that she's dealing with and talking to Bob about it. So yeah, I think Bob's character is good. I think the Sentry's good. I liked the way they depicted the Void too, just this black, like living shadow with eyes.
Right. Well,
Cool to see on screen.
Right, and I don't like to get into the cinematic aspect of it a ton because that's not the purpose of the story. But as a guy who's in the video space already, it was just so cool to see a character that was a complete completely devoid of color, right? That everything, it doesn't matter how colorful the world around him is, he's just completely black. And there was the very slight, like, shadows that you could tell that was the side of his cheek, right, as he turns his head. And that was it. And it was just, it was, in my mind, and then the eyes, of course. Of course, you could barely see the eyes peering out from the darkness. It's so good. Just visually loved it. Not to say that he's an amazing villain, but like that aspect is just appreciated. Didn't affect my rating. Anyways, keep going.
Yeah. I think they also did a very good job of showing how menacing the Sentry was, or not menacing, but how powerful he was, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Thunderbolts go up to him, instantly bodies all of them. Not even a competition there. And the way that they build this up is even better when you consider the fact that, like, right, you introduced Yelena. You see she's powerful. You introduced Ghost, and you introduced U.S. Agent. They're both pretty powerful. You introduce Taskmaster, who instantly gets shot in the head by Ghost, right? You're building up each of these individual characters' strengths. Then you introduce Bucky, who just straight up bodies these armored vehicles and is like very easily, like, his presence is like there. And the Red Guardian is like, yes, the Winter Soldier.
Right.
And then they come face to face with Bob, and Bob is just like, you guys are so retarded. And just
Not even a
up.
struggle. And he just got his powers too.
Yeah. I mean, he is supposed to be like one of the, if not, I guess not the, but one of the most powerful characters in Marvel Comics, from my understanding. So much so that, like, he takes on World Breaker Hulk, which is a whole nother side tangent, but it's like one of the most powerful iterations of Hulk, and he's like one of the last remaining characters to take him on. That said, yeah, there's like no stopping him from the Thunderbolts, and the Thunderbolts are just like, there are moments in the movie too where they're like stuck at the elevator shaft. They're like, so none of you fly? Like,
right.
no, we just punch things. And
Turns out
like,
that was a lie.
True. But yeah, they set up his power level as well, and then as soon as the Void enters the picture, it's just like people are just getting deleted. And I can tell you, both me and Maverick, I think one of the best scenes in the movie is when Red Guardian goes to save this little girl, and like this concrete breaks over his back. He's like, "Are you safe?" Instantly deleted. I was like, "Holy crap!"
Yeah, that was and that was one of the things that actually disappointed me about this film is that
they brought them back.
Well, no, it's not just that. It's that this film, all you see is the Void appears, and he pushes his hand out into the midst of the people of New York, and they all just start disappearing as shadows of what they once were, and it looks like they're all just dying. And you see that happens to the girl that the Red Guardian just saved, like a second after he saves her, and you go, "Wow, this is crazy." You know, so much for the innocence of life, you know, as she's just gone in a second. And then you have Yelena walk up to the Void. And it was so interesting because, in the one sense, you see her stand there, and then you see the Void take her. And that was surprising to me. Because in that moment, I thought she truly had just given into this despair that she had been struggling with as an individual in her inward difficulty. And so, looking at that moment, I thought, wow, this is crazy that she has just given into this despair and now she just died. And then I thought for a second and went, wait a second. Disney wouldn't do that. Turns out they wouldn't, because of course she's not dead. She's in this other world of the Void where you just have to face your fears constantly until you learn to face your darkest fears, more or less the premise of the Void's world. So, as soon as the Void's creator himself, Bob, does that, everyone is freed and everything goes back to normal. So much for the scariness of Bob and the Void.
Yeah, I will say, I was just the second Yelena walked into the shadow, I went, dang it, they're not dead.
Yeah.
I do think the ending is where this movie starts to really fall apart.
Well, I think it falls apart in that moment.
Yeah.
where they go into the void. Because before that, I think they've done very well at building up tension. Not necessarily the strongest physical tension, right? But a lot of emotional tension. They've done
Yeah.
very well at both building up emotional cachet in Yelena, in Bob, in the Red Guardian, and even in John Walker, to be honest. I think that John Walker has a lot more emotional stakes in this than most of the other characters. So,
Yeah. And we'll get to their characters in a bit.
Right.
I will say, I was sitting in the theater towards the end, right, during the credits, because we're waiting for the end credits scene, thinking like, how could they have handled this in such a way that they still are able to interact with Sentry's psyche or Bob's psyche.
Right.
And I think they probably do this by having the shadow continue to spread out, but not having the shadow itself be the thing that's deleting people. Maybe having the shadow just be the void covering New York and having people exist within the void, but the void still needs to make a conscious decision, right, to delete certain individuals. So one, you're not deleting.
Sorry, backing up just a second. You're saying as a hypothetical.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because right,
so you're saying how could we do the same thing they did in this film with actual consequences instead of just playing an Uno reverse card and saying, all right, everyone comes back to life.
Exactly.
Okay. Sorry, keep going.
And I think it also adds more weight to Sentry's character as well, like realizing the gravity of what his character is capable of, the void. And so, like, right, I think that scene where the little girl gets deleted, right? We made jokes about it, like, oh, wow, Andrew said dang it when she came back. But, like, it did so much in the moment because it was just like, there is nothing that the Thunderbolts can do to save these people. They are completely powerless because he doesn't even have to be near these people to just instantly delete them off the face of the earth.
Right.
And so I think they do something where the void, like the shadow, is spreading out over New York, but he still has to make the conscious decision to like put out his hand and delete people. What it does is it allows Yelena to still approach him, and maybe they like jump off the side of a building or something to touch him, right? Because it's indicated that in order for him to be a part of your psyche, you have to be able to touch the character of Bob.
Right. And that's hinted at earlier in the film.
Yeah,
when Bob makes contact with other characters.
Yeah. And so I think you just have the shadow spreading out over New York, and you have the citizens of New York and just chaos and fear. I think in my mind, I'm watching, right, even before Yelena enters the void, watching the void spread out and see it instantly delete people. I'm like, wow, they're increasing tensions really, really quickly, and there is absolutely nothing you can do to even get close to this guy. How are they even going to rationalize with him? What are they going to do here? This seems like too big of a threat for them to handle, where the entire world is just going to get deleted in a few seconds. And then Yelena went in and I was like, oh, okay, well, that's how we're doing it. Very interesting. Okay. A little disappointed here.
Yeah. Well, there was that brief pause where I thought maybe they'll do something where she's having the dialogue with the void, and then she walks into the void. Yeah, you know, but that doesn't save it. That doesn't save it. I mean, all in all, the point there that they get to is what they were trying to get to from the start, is that no matter what, Andrew, if you have your friends by your side, you too can overcome the darkness inside of you. How do you feel about that? You know, the message is so strong. It's literally slapping you in the face or punching you in the face. Because that's what he does to the void. Hint.
Yeah. I think there's a lot going on there. And it's hard for me to kind of think this one through, because as much as I like to make fun of the through the power of friendship whole thing, right? Because this is kind of what this movie does, is the power of friendship gets the void through it.
Right.
I still think there is it's an important conversation to have, right? Like,
sure. No, of course. And let me just say, as much as I mock the power of friendship as being a theme by Disney, it's more so because they use it so much. The idea that you should have friends by your side to help you through situations is not a bad message to convey, Right.
Well, I think also this movie is an appropriate message to be conveying because it's dealing with this idea of depression and being alone. Whereas other Disney movies are like, we need to take on a bad guy, and physically having my little friend here is going to help me do so, is a much dumber iteration of the power of friendship than, say, I am dealing with depression and suicide, and having a friend there is going to help me through it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I myself have never really gotten to the point of suicide per se, but I think there's definitely something to be said for having a friend there you can depend on and trust through difficult moments in life. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think the idea that, right, this character of Bob is a meth addict and has no friends in the world and was just looking for the next high, got these powers, and now he's trapped within his own psyche and hiding in a room, reliving, trapped in his house, really, reliving like what is supposed to be one of his worst memories. And then when he's trying to defeat the Void, and all the Void wants for him is to get angry. I think it's interesting, right? It's this idea of you're letting the trauma take control and just fuel this rage is a very unhealthy way of dealing with it. And that's why it's what the Void wants.
Right.
Whereas what he needs to do is handle it in a more healthy way and just process it with friends. Now, it feels so corny to be saying this out loud, but at the same time, I think it's just because we make fun of
As
it
they
so
all
much.
hold his hand.
Yes.
It's
I think it
okay,
is also
Bob. I
intentionally
got you.
making fun of this idea of like the power of friendship. Cause like you see Yelena give him a hug, and then the rest of them just go and they're like, we're gonna give you a hug now. And then you see like the Red Guardian is just like sitting there, just like you see, if you look at his face, it's just like he's just like, I'm a part of this.
Yeah, at the end, yeah.
I will say though, the way that they build up the relationships between characters and Bob as his friends, I do appreciate. You have Yelena, who's like this very much, I care about you. You have U.S. Agent, who is Bobby.
Right.
It's so good. Every time he's talking to him, he's like, "You're such a jerk." They're really the two characters that interact with him most.
Right. Ghost, not so much.
Yeah.
Red Guardian only as like a
Yeah, he's like
nice
the crazy uncle,
pat on the head type person, you know.
And Bucky's Bucky.
Yeah, I don't know. Was he even part of the hug?
Yeah, he was. Well, I will get to my thoughts on him later. I don't want to get, because the thing is, I could get on tangents about each of these characters.
Yeah, and we probably will for like 2 minutes apiece or something, just to give them their credit. But we're trying to finish up this idea of Bob, who was a unique character and had a lot of dynamics around him, so it's fair to give him some time.
And I will say, I love the fact that this was a villain that was so powerful, and these heroes could not compete physically, which is what Marvel movies have kind of devolved to, is this villain is so strong you can't beat him. With the power of friendship, I can beat him. They don't beat him. They kind of, they come to him and they like talk. Like, it's not the stereotypical we will beat the ever-living snot out of this villain ending, which is what Marvel has devolved to. Whether it's Kang the Conqueror or
Guardians of the Galaxy.
Well, Red Hulk, I guess they came and talked to him, but we had that conversation in a different podcast.
Yeah, but just watch the podcast.
Yeah, we're not reliving that pain.
No.
Turn us into the void.
For real. Yeah, I think that's probably enough on Bob and the themes of the story, as he's really, as soon as he comes to terms with his past, right, understanding who he is and the Void's control over him versus his control over the Void, and who's really in control here, he decides, or it overcomes the problems and the shadows overcoming New York, which constantly gets destroyed in Marvel Cinematic Universe, and they go back to normal, more or less. You have Valentina give this little announcement to save her own hide that I planned for these new superheroes to come here all along. Welcome to the new Avengers, right? And then the end of the movie, more or less. So that's the film you got. we're going to talk about the side characters, and then we're going to talk about the legacy of this film, if we think there's going to be one or not. So stay tuned for that. But let's start off with those side characters. I think it's only fair to talk about the first side character that comes into play in this film, Red Guardian. If you want to take the whole group besides Bucky,
I mean,
that's fair.
I think we could go with each of them individually. There's not a ton to talk about, but I think it's just worthwhile to talk about them each, like for 2 or 3 minutes.
Yeah, I would say go through your main thoughts on each of the main characters, and then I'll follow with mine, and that should be good.
No, we can just go back and forth. It breaks it up a little bit. I don't want to be monologuing. I'm not going to turn into Syndrome here.
You usually do, so I just thought I'd embrace it.
Yeah, fair enough. You might as well just give up at this point. Red Guardian is great, right? He serves as this father figure, and I think there's a lot there that you can miss if you just see him as comedic relief. He's this proud father, and he's proud of himself, but he's also proud of his daughter. He's like, "You're awesome. You're like basically a superhero." And like you get this sense where you see him as just like this, oh, I want to relive the glory days of being Russian superhero. And then when she confronts him and she's like, you left me, he's like, I didn't think you wanted me around. I would love to be a part of your life, but I'm such a failure as a father. I thought I was better off just leaving you alone. And then it's like, as the viewer, you're like, wow, that actually makes so much sense now when you think about his interactions with her from the very beginning. She's like, what are you doing? And he's trying to impress her. He's like, a very important phone call. I will make you food. Sorry, the house is messy. And he's like brushing off his couch, and he's like living as a slob. I think his character is great. He adds great comedic relief. He's living in the past, but he's also trying to bring this in the future, and he wants his daughter to be part of a superhero team, and he also wants to be a part of that team as well, and he wants to be co-leaders with Bucky.
You're right.
And he's also like sees the Winter Soldier, and like when you think about it, right, he is coming from the Soviet Union. Winter Soldier's been around since World War II. So he's heard myths and legends, and to him, the Winter Soldier is like another superhero from his era who is still just as awesome as he always was in his mind. And so he sees him, and he's like, wow, this is what I could be. So I think he provides
You are a superhero.
You are Super Soldier Serum. Where did you get yours, Hydra? Oh, yes, Hydra, fancy. You are like me. We are same. Different, but same.
Yeah, no, I mean, I like the Red Guardian. I think that his dynamic between exactly what you said with his daughter and then also his past, right, is a big part of how he plays into things. Now, granted, some of that leans into how he's raised his daughters, right? And you see some of that, it's not clear if, for example, the pushing down of the fears that Yelena talks about with Bob and how that's how you deal with problems in your life, if that's from her father or not in past teachings. But there are things about him that it's clear that Yelena respects her dad to some degree, right? To the degree that he tells her, oh, you know how you find fulfillment in life? You do good things for your country with the public being able to see it, right? And if the public sees it and they give you the kudos, you'll find fulfillment in life. Now, I think that message is a little convoluted, and they don't fully terminate that, but hopefully we'll see that in later films. So I'm not going to make a judgment call here on that, because I think that could lead to interesting plot points for future films. But for the purposes of this film, it leads to the termination at the end of the film, right? Where they're given an opportunity to turn Valentina in, or to accept this new role she's given them as the new Avengers. And what do they accept? The new role as the new Avengers, right? So a bad guy walks free because they accept the kudos to be in the public eye. And that is stimulated by the encouragement of her father at the beginning of the film, where he goes, "This is what I always wanted, and it made me feel awesome. You'll feel awesome too if you do this same thing." So, there's aspects of him in that regard where he's trying to be a good dad. His advice isn't always the best, but he's trying. And then also he's just so excited to be in the public space that it's hilarious. So he plays out as a character very well. I really, of all the characters in this film, as side characters, he's one of my two favorites. So
again, going back to the humor from him flows so well because he's a character who's just so desperate to. He's just Mr. Incredible, but Russian. He's so desperate to be reliving the glory days, in his own words.
yep.
And so every opportunity he gets of like an inkling of like, oh, we could do this again, he just says something and it just comes across as comedic. It's not a forced joke. It's just naturally outflowing from the character. So, yeah, I thought his character was great. I mean, the next one we get introduced to is John Walker, so I guess we could handle his.
Sure.
I think John Walker is also great. Like, his character is just like there's so much there. And it's done so well for being a side character that doesn't get as much focus as, say, Yelena or Bob. And it's like he comes across as this arrogant jerk. And you're trying. I think it's interesting, right? Because I'm thinking about this in terms of the themes of the movie of mental health and how do different people handle their own traumas. He's handling his trauma by burying it down and becoming that jerk, right? Becoming the bully, if you will. Not in like a physical way, although he very much does get physical with people. But in the I'm the sarcastic, I'm cool, I'm calm, I'm collected, telling everyone that his home life is great when it isn't because his wife and child left him. He went from the war hero, the 3 medals of honor, the peak human condition, the Captain America that replaced Steve Rogers, right? To being a nobody. And they show that in that flashback where he's reading the article, where he has become disgraced. And you see his interaction with his wife, where he's mistreating her. He doesn't care about his family life. He feels like he's lost everything. And this outflows from his talk too, right? He's constantly struggling and striving to prove his worth to those around him, almost because he needs to prove it to himself. Like, I'm not a complete failure. And he's constantly referencing like, oh yeah, I have this military knowledge. And they're like, yeah, we get it. You have knowledge of the military. So I thought his character was great. And I think that line too, when, was it Valentina? I think it's Valentina who reveals to the rest of the team, or no, it's Bucky who reveals to the rest of the team that like his family left him. Yeah, and they're all like, "Oh, wow, okay, your life does suck."
Yeah, well, it unmasks him as he can't play the fraud anymore, right? He can't pretend to be this person that he's not, because now everyone knows, one, right? He's the disgraced Captain America. Everyone makes their own jab at that, whether it's Junior Varsity Captain America or whatever it is. They know that he's not the real Captain America. They also know that his family's left him, and no matter what he says, right, in all the points that matters, as a professional and then at his personal life, he's failed. And so it's hard for him to make the case that he is the success he wants to be. And so he has to face the reality of that rather than pretending it doesn't exist. And that's what this film forces him to do. There is some point in the film where Yelena makes some jab at him for his wife leaving him. And that's the only, once again, a minor point about the dialogue, but it really bothered me for the sake of the character development because they didn't use it either for or against him. It was simply her being cruel for the sake of being cruel. So, didn't love that. But anyways, in regards to him as a character, I think he's super great. Not only is he funny, but he's also a character that's incredibly flawed, and we see it from the start, right? A Tony Stark type of arrogance, but with some actual bad blood in his past. And so that colors the character that we see in this film, and he's trying to pretend it's all good, and it's not. And this film unmasks it, and he has to face that reality. So I really enjoyed him as a character in this film, much more than I did in the half season that I ended up watching of Falcon and Winter Soldier. Didn't finish that show. But I did appreciate what I saw of him in this film compared to what I saw of him in that.
Yeah, I think his character is well flawed. It's great. I think that's a side note. I think one thing this movie does well, right? And I think about right. I've been thinking about the Marvel movies as a general whole because we have some of the same complaints about certain movies.
Mm-hmm.
It is an interesting task to take on a movie about a super powered individual and giving them a reason to be a good guy. Be it,
Right.
to reference The Boys, right? The Boys just embraces the idea of corrupt and naturally wicked humanity and says if we gave them superpowers, things would go crazy. And even the good guys in that show are bad. Like,
Right.
and so, like, the character of Captain America struggles with this a lot. How do we make him flawed when he is this character that represents like what is good and just in like all situations, all circumstances? And like Iron Man, they did well with him. But as you get into other characters, they start to struggle, and they're just like they're good for the sake of being good because that is right. Um, Peter Parker, right? Why is he a good guy? It was what he was taught all of his life. Great power comes great responsibility, and his uncle dying becomes a catalyst for that. Um, and so I think it's interesting because these characters are not necessarily in it for the altruistic good guy reasons, right? Red Guardian's in it for the fame and glory. Um, U.S. Agent probably for the same thing. And so it's interesting to see them given a reason to fight against this villain. That said, though, I don't know if you have anything to say on that. I was just going to move on to the
No, I
next.
mean, I just, other than if you look to the very beginning of the film, you see that reflected in what Valentina promises them each, right? Where you see U.S. Agent John Walker promised a clean slate. And that's super important to him because what he needs is not like a moral clean slate in his mind. What he sees is like he needs a public facing image clean slate. He needs the opportunity to remake his image from what it was before. And he knows he can do that because professionally and physically, he is a peak specimen. He is prime in his abilities. He knows what he can accomplish and he can do it well. So, yeah, I just say that confirms what you're saying there. But anyways, I think we should get on to probably Ghost and
The next side character, Taskmaster. Loved the way they handled her character. Honestly, was such a disappointment in the Black Widow movie. I wish that movie never existed solely because of the fact that Taskmaster was so botched in that movie, and Taskmaster is such a cool villain, and they made Taskmaster impotent, idiotic, and just plain out stupid. A foul mockery of the original character. Now, I want to go back and reference. Remember, I said I'm fine with them doing different interpretations of movies, but it's one thing to do a different interpretation of a character and another to completely botch them. You'll notice Spider-Man still remains Peter Parker and has the same type of outfit. He still has his Uncle Ben and his Aunt May. Iron Man is still, Iron Man. This was just stupid, and I think Disney actually realized they went way too far for this character and went, all right, we're killing them off, shoot them in the head. And I saw that and went, hallelujah. And then her body gets incinerated, so I'm hoping that's Disney's way of saying, yeah, we actually killed this character off.
but she was wearing heat resistant armor, don't you know, Andrew? She's coming back in the next movie.
Well, we saw blood coming out of the helmet, so it remains to be seen, to be honest. I'm hoping something with the multiverse and Doomsday brings us a better Taskmaster. Although Doomsday is going to be a trash fire as it is, so
Yeah,
that's another conversation.
even you saying that raises concerns in my mind.
True.
But we're not going to get into
Yeah,
Doomsday
yeah.
because it's not
All right.
this podcast episode.
Next side character, Ghost. There's not much to be said. I think of all of the Thunderbolts, Ghost gets the least amount of screen time and interaction with the rest of the characters. But she was much more interesting than she was in Ant-Man and the Wasp.
Yep.
She actually had like motivating and driving factors. She actually had some level of depth to her. Like she was an actual character and not just I hate people because I was experimented on. So,
Right.
I mean, those are my thoughts on Ghost. I don't know if you have anything else other than that.
No, I mean, I think that her powers in this one was also Now, granted, she had more time since, Ant-Man and the Wasp, but she actually had value in the film other than being like this experiment that didn't know what the heck she was doing. So it was interesting in that regard as well. But yeah, her character didn't have a ton of development. Her and both, in regards to the 4 people on the team before Bucky shows up, right? She's probably the least developed of them, and that's very clear. And you can't develop all the characters, so I don't have a
Yeah.
huge problem with it. But she was fine, and she was more interesting than what we'd seen previously. And her powers are inherently interesting, I would say. So I appreciated it.
And they definitely have utility too for their team, who is limited in comparison to, say, like the original Avengers.
I will say, I am curious, talking about Ghost, this is such a side tangent,
Sure.
but when they're climbing up, right, they're doing the freaking Emperor's New Groove move.
Yeah.
Why doesn't she phase into the wall immediately when they start falling? And then go up and go into that elevator, or like into the entrance.
The way she describes it in the movie and the way that her powers work, from my understanding, is she has to see where she's phasing into. And if she just phases into an unknown area, like she describes it as like she could just be phasing into dirt and die.
Yeah, but didn't she say she has like a minute to figure it out before she's totally toast?
Perhaps, but I mean, her character kind of just catches the wall.
Okay. I mean, I don't want to get too caught up in it, but I was just like, is there a response? And honestly, this is probably going to get cut out anyways. I'm just more curious than anything.
Yeah, you're good. Bucky. We all knew this moment was coming. I am a huge fan of Bucky.
All right, guys, it was nice to see you. See you all next week.
Yeah. Favorite character in the MCU. This movie was... Okay. This movie was very different in terms of how they handle Bucky's character. And I love that they did this, right? I love that they actually moved on from his arc instead of repeating it like they're doing with Sam Wilson's character, who is constantly going through this repetition of, I don't know who I am. I'm never going to fill the shoes of Steve Rogers every time he shows up on screen right now. Whereas Bucky, right, he goes through all of this trauma. He's dealt with it. He's handled it. He's gone through the deprogramming and all of the horrible things that he's done throughout Winter Soldier, Civil War. You see him in Endgame kind of finishing this up. You have some end credit scenes that show him too. You get that finally resolving in Falcon Winter Soldier for all of its flaws. You see Bucky actually going to therapy and working through his traumas. In this movie, he is not the character who is struggling with his self-identity and his traumas, right? And you even get that in a throwaway line almost where they're like, how did you get here? He's like, yeah, all those rooms of trauma. Yeah, like I haven't dealt with that before. He's just like, whatever. I've done this 1,000 times. I'm not having an issue with that. His struggle in this movie, which is, it's not really a struggle. It's just like, he's not a senator or a congressman. He is, like, in the beginning, so awkward around people. It's like, it's an unfortunate event, and we will deal with these unfortunate events. Thank you very much. And just leaves. Or, like, when he's trying to talk to another senator, and he, like, pulls him behind a corner where there's no cameras. He's like, why don't you just text me? I think Bucky's character was great, right? He serves as kind of this anchor for the team, if you will. This grounding force who's like, I know all of you have traumas. I've been there before. Like, wallowing in your self-pity isn't helping anybody.
Right.
And so, I mean, he had great action sequences, which is what I think Bucky should have. And he wasn't the main focus of the movie, which was great, right? We've had movies where he was pretty much the main focus, like Captain America Winter Soldier and Captain America Civil War. And he's had his development. Now, that's not to say that he can't have future development in other movies, but I think they did good in recognizing, like, this movie's about Yelena. This movie is about the Void. Winter Soldier is here. He is a character. And I think it was a good use of a well-established character that everyone knows and loves at this point without focusing on him a ton and giving him, like, oh, boo-hoo, Bucky has all of this trauma to deal with too, right?
Right.
So I enjoyed the Bucky scenes in this movie. I enjoyed the fact that they didn't make him this trauma-filled character who's like weeping on the floor when he enters the void, right? So
Yeah, I mean, leave it to Andrew to defend Bucky Barnes because that guy wishes he was Bucky Barnes.
I do.
Yeah, I think that Winter Soldier. I don't disagree that I appreciate they didn't focus on him. Right. I think that his development is barely better than Ghost. To be honest, I think both John Walker and Red Guardian's development as side characters in this film are much better than his, and that's simply because the whole idea, which they spend a significant amount of time on in his senator, or I forget, he's a congressman. I forget if he's in the House of Representatives or in the Senate.
He's a senator. They call
Okay,
him
so he.
no. Sorry, they call him Representative Barnes. So maybe. Oh yeah, that's right. Because he has a district. He's representing Brooklyn in New York.
Okay. So he's a House of Representatives. Anyways, he's in government. He's clearly not fit for that, and there's this discontinuity there. And then there's this discussion between him and Valentina about, you're not going to be able to be a senator anymore after this. You've clearly violated like the law, basically. And if you're a representative and you just do something this blatant, there's no way that you'll be able to continue to hold your house or seat in the House. Excuse me. So I think that you don't really see the outcome of that. Does he not, now that he's on the New Avengers, or does he? Like, it's not clear. I think you could probably infer, if you wanted to, that he's no longer a senator at the end as he takes on the mantle of the New Avengers. But, yeah, it's kind of, his whole arc is kind of shoved to the side for the sake of Yelena's and the Red Guardians and John Walker. So I don't have a huge issue with it, only so much as to say that he was short-shafted to some degree in regards to continuing his arc. But overall, yeah, I agree with much of what Andrew said, so I don't have a huge issue with him.
Well, I mean, the thing
and
is,
hopefully
like,
they develop him more in later films, right?
Yeah.
Like, this is stuff that it's like, we've seen him developed a lot in early films. He's one of the few hold-ons from previous early films that we've seen in the MCU. And he continues to stick around. So hopefully they're not reliant too much on him at this point, and his appearances do continue to contribute something significant to the MCU while not overshadowing it as they continue to develop new characters.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
I mean, it's pretty clear he's, especially after the end credit scene, he's kind of gone on to be the leader of these new Avengers, kind of with Yelena being in the spotlight as well. Especially considering the fact that he is what you would refer to as like an OG. He's an original. He was there with the original Avengers, and he's kind of.
I was there when it was written.
And even though, like, as someone who loves Bucky, I'm like a little disappointed they didn't completely fill out his arc, like explain what happened there. It's like, for the sake of the film, I understand why they didn't. So I wasn't really disappointed in the movie per se, and as someone who likes seeing the Winter Soldier on screen, I got all the dopamine release I needed when he flew over all of those armored trucks. So,
right, exactly. Bro was wearing the mask, so you know that he's.
I went
Bucky
and full
fan.
Makeup and everything. People thought I was there to blow up the theater, probably.
That's insane. I will say I was a little embarrassed to walk in the theater with him, so there's that. But
I mean, I don't know what you expected after I went to see Revenge of the Sith in full costume either. I was dueling on the stage, bro.
Yeah, so, anyways, what about the lasting impact of this film? You think that this film is going to stick around in regards to the MCU, or even into the film industry at large?
I think this film will actually have a much bigger impact on the MCU than Disney thought it would. And I think the reason for this is, right, Disney's been focusing so much on their IP and these world-ending events and the multiverse. And then they give us this film of these down-to-earth heroes, really. And what's interesting about them, right, is all of them have pretty minor superpowers other than Sentry and maybe Ghost. They all are just either Yelena or people with knockoff super soldier serum. Or altered version. Even Sentry is just an altered super soldier serum.
Mm-hmm.
They are not people like Thor or Hulk. Well, other than Sentry, right? Thor or Hulk or who are some other, or Wanda, like Scarlet Witch or Captain Marvel. Like, these are immensely powerful beings. And so in order to give them threats, right, you have to have these massive events occurring. Whereas these are just normal people with like a boosted level of strength or speed or abilities.
Right.
And so I don't know that that's necessarily the only thing that's going to be impactful about it, but I think it also is like just better story writing in general is what's going to make a movie more successful than putting a CGI'd Harrison Ford on the screen. Or having King the Conqueror in a movie, right? We don't need these big name characters. Even though Sentry, right, is this incredibly powerful being. Not many people know who Sentry is, per se.
Right.
So using these lesser known characters, not relying so heavily on IP, putting some level of effort into the story, letting the characters just speak out of the natural flowing of their personas rather than forcing humor onto them and dialogue onto them, right? It makes for a better film. And I think that's going to contrast so strongly. I'm predicting Fantastic Four is not going to be nearly as good, although I could be disappointed. But I think it's definitely going to contrast massively with the Doomsday movie.
Right. I think those three have been. Well, this one conjoined itself to the other two. Fantastic Four is very clearly being tied to Doomsday,
Yeah.
and that's just a given at this point. Thunderbolts kind of appended itself to the end of those, saying, "Hey, we're relevant to this all too. You know, this is going to be significant." And the end credits scene where they say, "Oh, there's two sets of Avengers. Who's going to be the true Avengers set?" Could lead into that, so it's not like this film is irrelevant, right? It does have some merit to that conversation. So will it be talked about in regards to the future MCU? Of course it will. I think this one is more significant insofar as I think it's actually a film I would rewatch in the MCU compared to other previous films, which is not something I'd say for most of what has come out recently from Disney's recent Marvel content. So I think it depends, right, on how the future films go. If future films from the MCU go well, they could look at this film and say this is the film where they started turning back to good films. And it wasn't perfect, it wasn't amazing, but it was solid. And it pointed to a future direction of great things to come. But, of course, if they turn back to their old ways and turn back to the dark side and become the decrepit, terrible films they have continued to release recently, it's going to be forgotten. A small blip in the overall trend of terrible films. So that's what you're going to get. I don't think it's going to get accolades in regards to the general cinema world. It's, a film.
Well, I think
that is
unfortunately what's
interesting.
happening right now is everyone is praising it like it is the best thing we've had since Avengers Infinity War, which it very well may be, but that doesn't mean it's like as good as everyone's puffing it up to be.
Well, it also just came out, right? And I think that that's
True.
one thing I caution against, especially when you watch films in the theaters, is as much as I enjoy a theater experience, I fully acknowledge that there is something about seeing it on a massive screen with massive speakers around you, and the whole environment is built to give you this super cool experience, right? And I would say that they do that fairly well. But you have to keep in mind that you have to step away from that, think about it realistically, and say what worked in this film and what didn't. And if you don't do that, you come off of that, walk up to your camera on TikTok, say this was the best thing that came out in the last 15 years. I love it so much. It's like, cool,
Yeah.
bro. Glad you didn't think critically. So, anyways, that's the pod. We hope you all enjoyed. We will be back as we always are next week. We'll see you all then.